4 bond marks glow against his skin as shock floods through every connection. Isamu's heart races as Soren's voice cuts through the darkness. There's another Omega, suppressed, in danger. We need to find him. Through the neural bonds, linking all 5 of them, Isamu feels something shift, a new purpose, a new mission. But this revelation changes everything. He thought he was complete. He thought 4 alphas had chosen him and only him. Now he understands. The pattern isn't finished. The synchronization is incomplete. There's someone else out there, and his alphas are determined to find them. But what does that mean for Isamu? If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. The chemicals taste like pennies and regret. I know this because I've been swallowing them for 7 years, and the flavor has become as familiar as my own name, which I've learned to think of in past tense. That man is gone. The Omega who existed before the suppressants, before the facial reconstruction surgery that changed the way people saw him, before he made the choice to disappear so thoroughly that even his own scent became a stranger. My name is Isamu Tanaka. I'm 29 years old, and I've spent the last 7 years becoming someone I don't recognize in the mirror, which is fine because I avoid mirrors now. What I am now is a shell. What I am now is safe. What I am now is a lie so complete that I've started to believe the parts I was supposed to forget. The suppressants don't just mask scent, they bury it. They chemically sever the olfactory signatures that make an Omega, the pheromone profile that would identify me across a room, down a hallway, through a closed door. They take the essential thing and lock it in a vault and throw away the key, and what's left is a person who walks through the world, undetectable, invisible, free. Or so the brochure said. 7 years later, I can't tell if I'm free or if I'm just trapped in a different kind of cage. One where I can't be found, but also can't be found. This is what I tell myself when I take the morning suppressant with coffee that tastes like metal. The suppressants are perfect. They're exactly what I paid 4 years of salary to obtain, and they work so completely that sometimes I forget what my actual scent was. Rain-soaked cypress. That's what the bonding specialist told me before I fired her and erased her number from every device I owned. Your secondary scent signature is rain-soaked cypress. Warm, grounding. The kind of scent that would make an alpha's hindbrain quiet down, make him feel safe. I don't want an alpha to feel safe. I don't want an alpha to feel anything at all when he looks at me. I want to be the kind of Omega that alphas forget they ever saw. The kind that blends into the background like one of the support beams in the office building where I work data entry, invisible and structurally necessary but fundamentally forgettable. The Seattle office of Morrison & Associates, a mid-level accounting firm that employs 43 people, most of whom don't know my name. This is the life I built on suppressants and surgery and the specific knowledge that I am worth more to the world as nothing than I ever was as anything. They came in January. 4 suits, 4 men, 4 somethings that made the entire floor go static the moment their elevator doors opened. I felt it before I saw them. A pressure change in the air. The kind that makes your inner ear adjust and your pupils dilate slightly. The kind that tells even a heavily suppressed Omega's hindbrain that alphas have arrived. Not just alphas, multiple alphas. And not the standard territorial kind that usually worked in isolation. These were coordinated. These moved like they had been synchronized since birth. Quadruplets. Soren, Kenji, Yuki, and Hiroshi Okada. 32 years old. Owners of the Okada capital venture firm that had just merged with Morrison & Associates. The names came to me through office gossip. The Okada brothers. Phenomenally successful, phenomenally private, phenomenally unmarked, which made the office gossip reach fever pitch because marked alphas were common, bonded alphas were expected, but 4 alphas, with 0 bonding marks between them, was something that made the unattached Omegas in the building nervous in ways I could smell on them, even through their own suppressants. I shouldn't have been able to smell anything. My suppressants were working. They were always working. But in the hours after those 4 men arrived, I felt something shift in my body. A vibration in the back of my teeth, a tightness in my chest, a sensation like someone had reached through my ribs and was holding my heart in a gentle fist. Fear. Alarm. My Omega body recognizing something even through 7 years of chemical burial, something that said, "These alphas are different. These alphas are the kind you were made to." I stopped the thought before it finished. I took an extra suppressant. I told my body to shut down, to go back to sleep, to forget what it had almost remembered. I was good at that. 7 years of practice had made me an expert at denial. The first time I saw them was in the elevator. I was going down at 4:17 on a Tuesday, and they were going up. The doors opened on the 23rd floor, and there they were. 4 men in suits so perfectly tailored they looked custom-made, carrying the kind of presence that made the elevator feel too small. They smelled like nothing, which was the only reason I noticed them. Because in a world where every alpha had a distinct scent signature, a distinct pheromone profile, the absence of that signature was itself a signature. Like negative space in a photograph, the Okada brothers were invisible in the same way I was invisible. And for some reason, the realization made my hindbrain scream in a way that only more suppressants could quiet. They didn't notice me. How could they? I was wearing gray. I was standing in the corner. My face was the kind people forgot the moment they looked away. One of them looked directly at me. The tallest one, dark-haired, with a scar along his left temple that I would learn later came from a venture deal gone violent, and his eyes passed over me like I was part of the elevator architecture. Blank. Disinterested. Perfect. That night I took 3 suppressants. My hands shook. My chest ached. My body was trying to remember what I had spent 7 years teaching it to forget, and I hated it. I hated my Omega instincts. I hated my biology. By the end of the first month, I knew their schedule better than I knew my own. Soren arrived at 7:45, Kenji at 7:53, Yuki at 8:01, Hiroshi at 8:12. They had coffee together in the partners' lounge at 8:30. They had meetings on the 34th floor from 9 to 12. They went to lunch together every single day at 12:30. They returned at 1:45. They had internal meetings from 2 to 5. They left together at 6. 4 men moving through the world in perfect synchronization. 4 alphas who seemed to be operating from a single nervous system. I learned their names. Soren, the oldest by 11 minutes, the strategic one, the face of the company. Kenji, the numbers man, the one who made the calculations that turned risk into profit. Yuki, the interpersonal one, the one who handled the deals and the partnerships. Hiroshi, the youngest, the quiet one, the one who moved through the office like he was listening to something no one else could hear. I told myself I was interested in them professionally. This was a lie. This was a lie I told myself at 6 in the morning when I timed my commute to end up in the elevator with them. This was a lie I told myself at 5:58 when I lingered over a report that could have been finished hours earlier, just to be in the office when they left. This was a lie I told myself when I started taking my lunch at 1:40 at the coffee shop on the first floor, positioned perfectly to see them arrive back from their midday leave. My suppressants started to fail. Not completely, not obviously, but in small ways. In the way my hands trembled when they passed, in the way my chest tightened when I heard their voices, in the way my body produced responses to their presence that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the thing I had spent 7 years trying to bury. The thing my Omega hindbrain knew about 4 alphas who moved through the world like they were looking for something. I increased the suppressants, double dose, then triple. My hands shook constantly now, but not from desire. From the chemical intensity of what I was putting in my body. My eyes began to water. The metallic taste that I'd become accustomed to turned bitter. My sleep fragmented into nightmares, where I was running through water that wouldn't move, pursued by 4 shadows that had no faces but whose footsteps sounded like home. In the nightmares, I could never tell if I was running away from them or running toward them. The distinction seemed to matter less with each dream, until eventually it didn't matter at all. They were coming. I was leaving. The 2 paths were going to intersect, and I was dying trying to prevent the collision. It was March when Soren caught me looking at him. We were in the bathroom, the private one on the 32nd floor that I used specifically because I knew they never went there. I was washing my hands, and the door opened, and he walked in, and for exactly 3 seconds before I could look away, his eyes met mine in the mirror. 3 seconds where I could see him seeing me, actually seeing me, not the invisible woman in gray but something underneath. His pupils dilated, his whole body went still, and then the moment broke, and I left, and I didn't go to the bathroom on the 32nd floor again. That night, I called the Hashimoto Corporation. I told them my suppressants were failing. They sent a representative to my apartment the next morning. He was an alpha, heavily marked, and he smelled like chemical burn and corporate efficiency. He took blood samples. He asked me questions. He told me that my suppressant levels were actually exceeding safe protocols and that my body was showing signs of stress consistent with overmedication. "Stop taking them," he said. "Your body is rejecting the chemical load. Take half a dose. Let your system recalibrate." I told him that was impossible, that I needed them stronger, not weaker, that I couldn't exist in the world without them, that the reason I had paid all that money was specifically to ensure that I would never have to exist as an Omega in the normal way, never have to be noticed, never have to be found. He looked at me with something like pity. "You're not that suppressed. No suppressant is perfect. You're just fighting harder than most people. That's what's breaking you, not the chemistry, the war you're waging against your own biology." I didn't listen. I called a different supplier. I bought new suppressants that were stronger, ones that made my hands shake worse but that guaranteed I wouldn't be seen, wouldn't be found, wouldn't matter. The weeks that followed were a descending spiral. My body began to reject the suppressants at the molecular level. I developed a rash on my arms. I stopped eating. The metallic taste in my mouth became so persistent that I couldn't taste anything else. My sleep became fragmented hallucinations. In them, I was always in a room with 4 alphas. They never had faces, but they surrounded me, and instead of attacking, they simply held me. And even in the nightmare, even knowing it was a dream, my body responded with a relief so profound it woke me gasping and covered in sweat. I kept going to work. I kept being invisible. I kept timing my commute to the elevator with them, and they kept not noticing me, and I kept taking suppressants that were slowly poisoning my body from the inside out. By now, I was barely functional. My coworkers noticed. Someone called my emergency contact, my mother, who called me and demanded to know if I was taking care of myself, who I had not spoken to in 4 years, because she represented everything I was trying to escape. I lied to her. I told her I was fine. I told her I was just stressed. I told her that the new merger at work was taking a lot of energy. Then I hung up and took another suppressant and went back to the careful work of dying invisibly. It was Hiroshi who found me, on the floor of the 32nd floor bathroom, where I had collapsed while trying to make it through another day, where my body had finally decided that the chemical load and the biological war and the fundamental rejection of my own existence was too much. He was the one who called emergency services. He was the one who told the paramedics that his name was Hiroshi Okada and that he was taking responsibility for the unconscious Omega until her family could be contacted. He was the one who rode in the ambulance and sat beside my stretcher and held my hand. I woke up in a hospital bed with my mother on one side and a man I barely recognized on the other. His hand was warm against mine. His eyes were locked on my face with an intensity that suggested he had been watching me sleep for hours. "You're safe," he said, and his voice was the one I recognized from the hallways, the quiet alpha. "You're safe, and you're not going anywhere, and we're going to talk about the suppressants you've been taking, and why your body is currently showing signs of biochemical breakdown." "We," I repeated, and his grip tightened just slightly. "My brothers and I. We know what you are. We've known since January. We heard your heartbeat. Even with all the suppressants, even with all the chemical burial, we could hear it. A heartbeat is the only thing that can't be suppressed, the only thing that can't be buried." And 4 alphas with perfectly synchronized audio processing could hear it echoing through this entire building. In the bathroom, in the break room, in the elevator every evening at 6:03. "We heard your heartbeat, and it was breaking." The doctors explained that the suppressants I'd been taking were banned in most countries for good reason. Chemical suppression wasn't designed to be used in the intensity and duration that I had subjected myself to. It was a temporary solution for Omegas in crisis, not a long-term lifestyle. My organs were showing signs of stress. My electrolytes were dangerously imbalanced. My liver was struggling. My kidneys were struggling. Everything inside me was rebelling against the chemical warfare I had declared on my own biology. Another week, they said, and I would have experienced complete system failure. My body would have simply shut down. Heart would have stopped. Kidneys would have failed. I would have died quietly on a bathroom floor, and the only person who would have noticed is someone looking for a heartbeat that had finally stopped fighting. I had tried to kill myself without even knowing I was doing it. That was the revelation that broke something in me. That was the moment when I realized that all the logic I had used to justify the suppressants, all the careful reasoning I had applied to my own destruction, was just a story I had been telling myself to make the suicide seem like survival. When my mother finally went to get coffee, and it was just me and Hiroshi in the hospital room, I asked him the question I should have asked immediately. How did you know? How could you possibly know what I was, when I did everything I could to make sure no one would ever know? He reached over and found the pulse point in my wrist where it was visible beneath the IV, and he pressed his thumb against it gently. This heartbeat, this pulse, this is you. Not the suppressants, not the invisibility, not the surgery or the chemicals or the 7 years you spent trying to disappear. This is what my brothers and I have been hearing since January. This is the thing we're not going to let you kill anymore. I didn't ask them why. I didn't ask why 4 alphas would go to the trouble of tracking a heartbeat through a building, of arranging medical supervision, of offering guest house living arrangements to a complete stranger. But I thought I already knew the answer. It was the same reason every alpha wanted every omega. Pheromones. Biology. Except I didn't have pheromones. I had suppressants. I had an absence so complete that there was nothing for them to want. So their interest had to be something else. Something that terrified me more than the suppressants ever had. It had to be me. The actual person. Not the scent, but the heartbeat. Not the biology, but whatever rhythm my body had maintained even through 7 years of war against itself. The guest house in Ballard was beautiful in the way rich people's guest houses are beautiful, meaning it was cold and perfect and designed to make you feel like you were living in someone else's life, which I was. Kenji had arranged for a housekeeper. Yuki had arranged for a personal nutritionist. Hiroshi had arranged for daily visits from a doctor specializing in suppressant withdrawal, and Soren had arranged for my schedule to be freed from the Morrison office so that I could focus on recovery. Recovery. As if what I had done to myself was an injury instead of a choice. As if what I needed was healing instead of acceptance. The doctors in the Okada facility were competent. The withdrawal protocol was more bearable than I expected. By week 2, I could taste things other than metal. By week 4, my hands had stopped shaking. By week 6, the rash on my arms had begun to fade. And by week 8, when I looked in the mirror for the first time in months, I saw a person who was startlingly alive. The issue was that I could also see, underneath the recovery, the edge of something else. The suppressants had been blocking something besides pheromones. They'd been blocking sensation, connection. Now that they were wearing off, I was starting to feel again, and what I was feeling was panic. By week 17, my doctor declared me medically recovered. The suppressant toxins were fully cleared. I was healthy. The implication was that I could leave. The implication was that I no longer needed the guest house, or the housekeeper, or the personal nutritionist, or any of the support structures the Okada brothers had built around my recovery. I asked them for one more week. I asked Soren, actually, in that direct way he had taught me to communicate. I said, "I'm not ready to go back to being invisible." "You never have to be invisible again," he said. "We saw you. We heard your heartbeat. We know what you are. And we're not going to let you forget it." That's when everything shifted. When the careful distance they had maintained during recovery started to collapse. When Hiroshi stopped asking permission before holding my hand. When Yuki started sitting close enough to touch during meals. When Kenji started leaving detailed notes about recovery research with his personal phone number. When Soren started looking at me with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he was cataloging something, planning something, deciding something. By week 12, the suppressants were completely out of my system. The doctor told me that my body was now fully Omega again. That my biological signature would return. That my natural pheromones would re-establish themselves. She told me this like it was a positive thing. Like becoming detectable was something I should want. Like being findable was a gift instead of a curse. She was right, and I hated her for it. Because after 7 years of war against my own body, having it stop fighting me back felt like homecoming. The ache in my chest started to ease. The tightness in my jaw softened. And the thing I had been suppressing hardest, the thing that had required the most aggressive chemical burial, started to surface. The thing I was feeling was want. Specific want. Directional want. It had 4 sources, and those sources all had names. The first time I smelled them, after the suppressants fully cleared, I understood why people called it recognition. It was remembrance. My body had been holding their scent in a vault all this time, waiting for permission to acknowledge it. Now that permission had been granted, the scent memory was overwhelming. 4 distinct signatures. 4 alphas, who I would later learn had also been on suppressants this entire time. Not because they wanted to be invisible, but because they had been waiting for me to stop hiding, and they didn't want to overwhelm me. It was Soren who finally said something about it. We were in the study of the guest house. I was looking at medical journals without actually reading them, and he was reading something on his phone without actually paying attention to it. The pretense was so thin, it was translucent. "Your scent is back," he said. "You're starting to smell like yourself again." I didn't respond. I couldn't respond, because acknowledging the reality of what he was saying meant acknowledging that I was no longer invisible. By the 3rd month of recovery, my doctor declared me not just physically recovered but emotionally stable. The implication was that I was ready to move forward, ready to integrate back into life, ready to make decisions about what came next. But integration meant existing in the world as the person I was becoming. And the person I was becoming was someone 4 alphas had decided to notice. Soren brought medical journals to the guest house, tagged with handwritten notes in his precise handwriting. Studies on Omega health, studies on suppressant recovery, studies on the long-term effects of chemical self-suppression. Each one felt like he was telling me something he couldn't say out loud, that he was concerned about my well-being, that he wanted me to understand what I had done to my body, that he cared about whether I lived or died. Kenji would bring financial reports about the Morrison office and ask my opinion on productivity metrics. This felt like a compliment because it suggested he saw me as someone worth asking things, someone whose judgment mattered. We would sit at the kitchen table for hours while he walked me through investments and market trends, and I would offer analysis based on the patterns I noticed, and he would listen to me like people usually only listen to people they respected. Yuki would bring wine. We would sit in the garden on the rare days when Seattle offered sunshine, and he would tell me stories about the business deals that had made the Okada capital fortune. He talked the way someone talks to a peer, not to an Omega, not to a patient, but to another person worth talking to. Tales of risk and calculation and the moments when you had to trust your instincts over your spreadsheets. He talked the way someone talks to an equal. And Hiroshi would come by every evening at 6 o'clock. He would bring tea. He would sit with me on the back porch and listen to nothing, the way I had learned to listen to nothing when I was trying to be invisible. But the difference was that his silence felt like presence instead of absence. He was there. He was always there. By week 17, I realized I had stopped being a patient and had become something else, something more complicated, something that 4 alphas had been waiting for. I was sitting in the chair on the back porch, watching the sun set over the sound, when Hiroshi found me. "Your heartbeat changed," he said. "It's been accelerated for 3 days. Tell me what's wrong." "Everything," I said, and I meant it. "Everything is wrong because I spent 7 years trying to disappear and now I can't disappear, and the thing I'm most afraid of is that you might actually want me to stay. That you and your brothers might actually think I'm worth keeping. Because I'm not. I'm an Omega who tried to destroy himself. I'm someone who chose chemical burial over existence. I'm not worth the time you've spent, the resources you've invested, the patience you've demonstrated. You should let me go back to the suppressants. You should let me disappear for real this time." Hiroshi turned his head. He looked at me in that way he had that suggested he was listening to something underneath the words, something true that existed in the silence. Then he reached over. He found my wrist. He pressed his thumb against the pulse point, and he held it there, feeling my heartbeat underneath his skin. "This," he said. "This, right here. This is what we want. Not your scent, not your biology, not the Omega you are by accident of birth. This, the rhythm that's still fighting, the heartbeat that survived 7 years of you trying to stop it. That's what my brothers and I have been listening for since January, and that's what we're not going to let you destroy." He held my wrist while I cried. He held it for hours while the sun set over Ballard and the sky turned colors that looked like his name. The weight of his presence, the consistency of his attention, was something my body had learned to crave. After years of forced isolation, after years of pushing people away, the simple act of being held while I fell apart felt like a revolution. When I finally stopped crying, when my breathing steadied and my tears dried, I looked at him with eyes that saw him clearly for the first time since I woke up in the hospital. He smiled. It was the first time I had seen him smile, and it changed his entire face into something that looked like home. Like the place I had been searching for all along, without knowing what I was searching for. "I'm terrified," I said. "I'm terrified of what happens next. I'm terrified that you and your brothers will get to know me and decide I'm not worth the effort. I'm terrified that being found is worse than being invisible. I'm terrified that I'm going to let myself want something and then lose it, because that's what always happens to people like me." He listened to every word. He didn't try to convince me my fears were unfounded. He didn't offer false reassurance. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He opened a voice recorder and pressed play, and I heard it. My heartbeat, recorded from somewhere in the Morrison office building, played back to me through the speaker of his phone, the steady rhythm of my survival, the sound of a body that had refused to give up even when my mind had surrendered. "That's what we've been hearing," he said, "for months, every single day. This rhythm, this proof that you were alive and present and real. My brothers and I have built our entire lives around the knowledge that somewhere out there this heartbeat existed, and we were patient enough to wait for it to lead us to you. We will be patient enough to wait for you to believe that you're worth finding. The question is," he said, and his voice was steady and certain, "do you want to know what happens next? Do you want to find out if 4 alphas who have been synchronized since birth can actually synchronize with an omega who spent 7 years trying to desynchronize with his own existence? Do you want to discover what it feels like to have 4 people listening for your heartbeat, not just once, but for the rest of your life?" I sat with that question. I let it settle into my chest. I felt my heartbeat respond, accelerating slightly as my body recognized what I was being offered. Permission, acceptance, the radical possibility that being found wasn't the worst thing that could happen. I said yes. I said it before I could think about it. I said it before I could catastrophize it. I said it before I could convince myself that I didn't deserve the thing my body was screaming for. I said yes because somewhere in the last 3 months, between the suppressant withdrawal and the food Kenji prepared and the wine Yuki brought and the journals Soren left on my desk, I had started to want to live. Not just survive, actually live. And that was the moment when everything changed. When I stopped running from 4 alphas who had been listening for my heartbeat since before I was even aware they existed. When I stopped believing that invisibility was safety. When I finally understood that the thing I had been afraid of my entire life was actually the thing that could save me. The thing that could make me matter. The thing that could make me real. The morning after I said yes was the morning I realized I had no idea what I had actually agreed to. Hiroshi walked me inside from the porch as the sun was setting over the sound, and I expected him to explain it, to tell me what comes next means, to give me the kind of detailed breakdown that would let my analytical mind process the emotional commitment I had just made. Instead, he simply led me to the kitchen, made tea the way I had learned he made it, and asked if I wanted to know why they were suppressed. It wasn't the question I expected. My whole life, since I was 17 years old, I had understood alpha suppression as a choice made by alphas who wanted to move through the world without triggering response. But that understanding was incomplete. I asked him, and Hiroshi set down his tea with deliberate slowness. He looked at me like he was deciding whether to trust me with something precious and irreplaceable. Then he told me a story that he said he had never told anyone outside his family. "Our mother died giving birth to us," he said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of something ancient and painful. 4 alphas born at once, 4 bodies sharing 1 placenta. It was medically impossible. Statistically, the probability of survival for even one of us was minimal, but our father's alpha genetics, combined with our mother's omega physiology, created something that shouldn't have been viable. Yet we were viable. We were born. And then she died. She died in the hospital 2 days after we were born from complications that even the best medical intervention couldn't prevent. My father spent the next 10 years raising 4 alphas alone without ever bonding to anyone, because he said that what he and our mother had was so specific, so synchronized, that a second bond would feel like a betrayal of the first. He said that some bonds are unique, that some connections exist only once in a lifetime, that to dilute it with another bond would be to diminish the memory of what he had experienced with her. By the time we were old enough to understand what we were, we realized that 4 alphas without paternal guidance was a problem. We were aggressive, we were territorial, we were constantly fighting each other for dominance in ways that didn't make sense because we were meant to be coordinated, not competitive. My father brought in specialists who said we had a neurological disorder, that our brain patterns were too synchronized, that we would need to be separated in order to develop normally. He refused. He said that what we had, this synchronization, was a gift. What we needed was not separation. We needed an omega. We needed the thing that our biology had been designed for. 4 alphas balanced by a single omega who could complete the synchronization. By the time we were 17, we understood what he meant. And we also understood that finding an omega who could handle 4 alphas, who could exist in the presence of that much synchronized intensity, was nearly impossible. Omegas wanted stability. They wanted to be chosen by a single alpha. The idea of 4 alphas, synchronized and aggressive and moving together like they shared a body, was too much. So we made a decision. We got suppressants. Industrial-grade ones. We buried our pheromones the way you buried yours. And we went out into the world looking for something that might be looking for us. We spent 15 years looking, Hiroshi continued, his voice steady and precise. We looked in clubs. We looked in bonding agencies. We looked in the offices of every company we invested in. We looked everywhere. And then, one day in January, we walked into a building, and we heard a heartbeat. Not a scent. A heartbeat. One heartbeat that was wrong in a way that made our synchronized nervous system recognize it immediately. A heartbeat that sounded like safety and terror and desperate, suppressed want all at the same time. Your heartbeat, he said. That's what we've been listening for our entire lives. That's what our father told us to look for. Not the scent of an omega, the sound of a person who could match us, who could complete us, who would be just as necessary to us as we would be to them. Soren arrived at the guest house the next evening with his laptop and a presentation. He set it up in the study like he was about to pitch me on an investment opportunity. The presentation was titled 4 Points of Synchronization. It had slides with graphs. It had financial projections. It had neuroscience papers about what happened when 4 alphas bonded with a single omega. It was, in its way, the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for me, because it meant they had taken the thing they wanted from me and presented it not as a demand, but as a problem that required solving. On the 5th slide, there was an image of a heartbeat monitor. 4 lines, synchronized, and then a 5th line, off rhythm, broken, struggling. Then on the next slide, the same 5 lines, but now they were all pulsing in harmony. This is what we become, Soren said, when 4 alphas and 1 omega bond, 1 synchronized organism, 1 nervous system, 1 heartbeat. I asked him what happened to individuality, what happened to autonomy, what happened to the specific, irreplaceable thing that made me me and not just a function in their pattern. You remain yourself, he said. But you remain yourself inside something bigger. You don't lose boundaries. You gain connections. Every alpha in this house will know what you're feeling before you feel it. You'll know what they're feeling. No more hiding. No more pretending. No more building walls to separate yourself from the world. Instead, you'll be completely vulnerable to 3 other people. And they will be completely vulnerable to you. And somehow, despite how impossible that sounds, that's how people actually survive together. Kenji came by the next day with financial paperwork, legal documents that transferred significant assets to my name, accounts that had been set up in trust, a property deed for a house in Ballard that I recognized from drives I had taken during recovery. He laid everything out on the study table like he was explaining a quarterly report. These are yours, he said. Regardless of what you decide about bonding, you survived 7 years of attempting suicide by chemical suppression. You didn't let your body die. You came back. That takes a specific kind of strength, and that strength deserves to be acknowledged. Yuki came with wine and stories. He sat with me in the garden and told me things he said Soren had made him promise to tell me, stories about their childhood, about their father raising 4 alphas alone and teaching them that synchronization wasn't a curse, it was a gift, that the best way to be synchronized wasn't to be identical, it was to be complementary. Hiroshi didn't come for 3 days after his revelation on the porch. For 3 days, he maintained a careful distance. He was still present in the guest house, but he was in other rooms, doing other things, giving me space to process. It was the most generous thing he could have done, and it made me miss him more than I thought possible. By the 3rd day, I realized I was looking for him, that I was listening for the specific sound of his heartbeat in the hallways. I went looking for him. I found him in the library of the guest house, reading the same book he had been reading the day I said yes. He looked up when I entered, and his expression was carefully neutral, which meant he was protecting himself, which meant he was hurt. I don't want space, I said. I don't want distance. I want you. All of you. All 4 of you. I want to know what happens when my heartbeat synchronizes with yours. He stood. He crossed the room. He took my left wrist, and he pressed his thumb against the pulse point. Then he took his right wrist and pressed my thumb against his pulse point. And we stood like that, connected by nothing but heartbeat, connected by nothing but the physical acknowledgement that we were both alive and both present and both choosing this. The next morning, all 4 of them came. They came together, moving as though they shared one body. They came into the study where I had decided to wait for them, and I could smell them now. Not the masked scent of the suppressants, the real scent. 4 alphas, unburdened, unmasked, offering themselves to me in the only way they knew how. "We need to talk about what comes next," Soren said. "Bonding marks. The specific, irreversible claiming that would sync my heartbeat with theirs for the rest of our lives. There are things you need to know," Kenji said. 4 bonding marks instead of 1 means 4 connections instead of 1. Complete neural synchronization. But it also means that when you're struggling, we all feel it. When you hurt, we hurt. We can't separate ourselves from you. We can't pretend not to care. But you don't lose yourself, Yuki added. You gain us, and we gain you. And the 5 of us become something that none of us could be alone. Hiroshi stepped forward. He held out his hand. When you bond with us, you become part of something. You become part of our synchronization. Your heartbeat becomes our heartbeat. But you don't lose boundaries. You gain connections. I asked them why. Why they wanted this so badly. Why they had spent 15 years searching. Because, Soren said, 4 alphas without an omega is unfinished. It's like a circuit that can't complete. We can exist, but we can't synchronize fully. Because your heartbeat, Kenji said, is what makes all 4 of our heartbeats make sense. Because we've been waiting for someone who could be with all of us, Yuki said. Someone who could exist in the center of 4 alphas and not feel diminished. Because, Hiroshi said quietly, the moment I heard your heartbeat, I knew that everything my father had told us was true. That you existed, that you were out there, that you were worth waiting for, that you were the 5th point of the pattern. They gave me a week, 1 week to process. 1 week to exist in the guest house with 4 alphas moving through it, all of them suppressing their scent now, giving me space while waiting for me to decide if I could actually do this. It was the hardest week of my life, not because I was suffering, but because I was learning what it felt like to not be alone. By the 4th day, I had moved into their house in Wallingford. I hadn't made a conscious decision about it, but when morning came, and Soren asked if I wanted to see the place they had prepared for me, I found myself saying yes. It was a beautiful house with windows overlooking the city. My room was on the same floor as all of theirs, but separated enough that I would have privacy when I needed it. This is yours, Soren said, showing me a room that had been designed with my input without my knowledge. Gray walls because I loved gray. Windows that faced the sound. A bed that was soft and enormous. On the 5th day, I asked for the bonding to happen. I asked by walking into the living room where all 4 of them were gathered, and I asked by unbuttoning my shirt. Soren's teeth found the junction of neck and shoulder. The bond mark seared into place, and I felt the moment his neural pattern aligned with mine, felt the moment his heartbeat began to sync with my heartbeat. Through the bond, I felt his emotions like they were my own. Triumph, satisfaction, and underneath all of it, desperate, overwhelming love. Kenji marked my left wrist, over the pulse point where Hiroshi had touched me. His bite was sharper than Soren's, more precise. Through the 2nd bond mark, I felt his brilliant mind open to me completely. Yuki marked my right hip. His bite was slow and deliberate. Through the 3rd bond mark, I felt the depth of him. Hiroshi marked the place where my heart lived. His teeth found the skin above my heart, and he bit down with a gentleness that contradicted the intensity of the mark. Through the 4th bond mark, I felt the way he had been listening for me my entire life. 4 bonds, 4 marks. The pain was extraordinary. The pleasure was extraordinary. The specific sensation of 4 alphas marking me all at once, all flooding my system with their emotions through the newly created bond marks, was the most overwhelming experience of my life. I felt all 4 of them. Felt their joy, their possession, their triumph, their love. Felt the way they had been incomplete and were now complete. Felt the way I had been running and was now finally home. I bonded them back. It took me longer because I only had teeth, because I only had one body, because I couldn't mark all 4 of them simultaneously. But Soren tilted his neck, and I bit down over his pulse point, and I marked him with the specific knowledge that this alpha had spent 15 years waiting for me. Kenji offered his wrist, and I marked him there, and I felt his brilliant mind open to me completely. Yuki offered his shoulder, and I marked him there, and I felt the depth and mystery of him. Hiroshi offered his heart, the place right over where his heartbeat lived, and I marked him there, and I felt the thing I had known since I heard him speak, that he had been listening for me my entire life. 4 bonds, 4 marks, and then we collapsed together into the middle of the living room floor, all 5 of us tangled together, all 5 of us feeling each other's heartbeats through the connection, all 5 of us finally complete. We stayed like that for hours, tangled together, connected through the 4 bond marks, feeling each other's emotions as our own emotions. Through the bonds, I felt them celebrating. I felt them relieved. I felt the specific joy that came from finally achieving what they had been created to achieve. And I felt the way they loved me, all 4 of them, with an intensity that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with the specific, irreplaceable person that I was. When we finally moved, it was as a single, coordinated organism. 5 heartbeats moving together, 5 nervous systems operating in synchronization. We moved to my room, and I discovered that bonding wasn't just physical. It was neural. It was complete and irreversible, and the most terrifying, beautiful thing I had ever experienced. Soren could feel when I was anxious before I knew I was anxious. Kenji could sense when I was about to break down. Yuki could anticipate my needs before I expressed them. Hiroshi could know what I was feeling by the specific rhythm of my heartbeat, and I could feel all of them. Not just their emotions, their entire consciousness bleeding into mine like watercolor through paper. I could feel Soren's strategic mind calculating futures. I could feel Kenji's precision organizing data. I could feel Yuki's depth processing complexity. I could feel Hiroshi's patience listening to everything, 5 heartbeats finding a common rhythm, 5 nervous systems becoming one. We slept tangled together on my enormous bed, my head on Hiroshi's chest so I could listen to his heartbeat through the bond. Soren's arm around my waist, his fingers spread across my ribs like he was counting each breath I took. Kenji's hand holding my left hand, his thumb stroking my palm even in sleep. It was the deepest sleep I had experienced in years. No nightmares, no running through water that wouldn't move, no shadows without faces, just 5 heartbeats in perfect synchronization, and the deep, bone-level knowledge that I was safe, that I was home, that I didn't have to run anymore. In the morning, everything was different. The world was the same, but I was different. I was marked. I was bonded. I was no longer invisible. My scent was no longer buried. My pheromones were no longer suppressed. 4 alphas could smell me on the street, and I realized, waking up in the middle of a tangle of alpha limbs, that I didn't care anymore. That the thing I had spent 7 years trying to avoid was actually the thing that had set me free. The first week of bonding was an education in what it meant to not be alone in my own head. Every emotion I felt, they felt. I couldn't hide. I couldn't pretend. I couldn't perform the part of myself that seemed safe or acceptable. Instead, I existed in complete and utter transparency. And instead of rejecting me, instead of abandoning me, instead of deciding that the real version of myself was too broken or too damaged, they simply held me through it. They understood because they could feel it. They accepted because they had no choice but to accept the truth that lived in the bonds between us. When I was anxious about my mother finding out, all 4 of them knew. Soren immediately made the decision to call her and explain, and through the bond, I felt his certainty. This wasn't something we needed to hide. This was something we needed to share. When I was grieving my 7 years of chemical suppression, Kenji held me through it. I felt his grief too. Felt the way he grieved the years I had been suffering. Felt the way he wished he could have found me sooner. Felt the way he would spend the rest of his life making sure I never had to suffer like that again. Yuki simply sat with me during the dark hours, his quiet presence a constant reassurance, and Hiroshi monitored my heartbeat through the bond, helping me regulate my nervous system when the emotions became too intense. When Soren called my mother, he didn't ask permission. He simply informed her that her son was bonded, that he was safe, that he was happy, and that she was welcome to visit if she wanted to meet the family he had chosen. The audacity of it should have offended her. Instead, she arrived at the Wallingford house 3 days later with luggage and an expression of determined acceptance. She walked in like she was preparing for a fight, and then she saw me. She saw the 4 bond marks on my neck, clearly visible in the morning light. She saw the way all 4 alphas were positioned around me, not in a threatening way, but in a way that suggested they had positioned themselves there specifically for her to understand exactly how much I was wanted. She looked at each of the Okada brothers in turn, assessing them the way mothers assess the people their children have chosen. Then she looked at me. "Are you happy?" she asked. "Not do you think you're making the right decision? Not are you sure about this? Just, are you happy?" The simplest question, the only question that actually mattered. "Yes," I said. "For the first time in my life, I'm happy." She nodded. Then she set down her luggage and asked where the kitchen was. She stayed for 3 days. She cooked in Kenji's kitchen, and I watched as my mother and the numbers man sat at the table discussing market trends and business strategy with the ease of two people who understood that success required precision and calculation. She told Soren stories about my childhood that made him lean forward with the intensity of a man learning something essential about the person he had bonded with. She laughed with Yuki about the specific absurdities of the business world, and they bonded over an understanding of what it took to navigate systems of power and influence. She sat with Hiroshi in the garden and listened to him explain how bonding worked, how the neural connections between Alpha and Omega created a synchronization that went beyond the physical and entered the realm of the psychological. By the end of it, she understood what Hiroshi had known since he heard my heartbeat in an elevator, that 4 alphas and 1 omega, synchronized, was not a burden, it was a solution. It was the most elegant expression of what happened when people were designed to fit together and finally found the person designed specifically for them. On her last night, my mother took me into my room and closed the door. She held my face in her hands and looked at me like she was checking to make sure I was really here, really alive, really happy. "Your father would be proud," she said. "He always said that alphas and omegas were meant to balance each other. He always said that running from your biology was like running from yourself. I thought you were running from pain, but you were just running until you found the right people to run toward." Before she left, before she watched all 4 alphas coordinate to drive her to the airport with the same efficiency they brought to everything else in their lives, she took each of them aside privately. I never found out what she said to them, but through the bonds, I felt it. Soren's satisfaction, Kenji's appreciation, Yuki's amusement at whatever warning she had probably given him, Hiroshi's gentle understanding that my mother was simply doing what mothers did, protecting her child by making sure the people who loved him understood the depth of their responsibility. After she left, after the house settled back into the rhythm of 5 heartbeats finding their synchronization, I stood in the middle of the living room and realized something. I had spent 7 years becoming invisible. I had spent 7 years trying to disappear. I had spent 7 years in a slow-motion suicide that I had convinced myself was survival, and in the process, I had buried not just my pheromones, but my entire capacity to exist, to be loved, to love back, to be happy. It took 4 alphas, synchronized, listening for my heartbeat, waiting for me to stop running, to dig me back out. After she left, I stood in the middle of my room and realized something. I had spent 7 years becoming invisible. I had spent 7 years trying to disappear, and in the process, I had buried not just my pheromones, but my entire capacity to exist. That night, bonded and marked and completely integrated into the life that the Okada brothers had built, I had the nightmare again, the one where I was running. But this time, when I woke up gasping, all 4 of them were there. All 4 of them had felt it through the bonds the moment my terror spiked. Soren held me while I cried. Kenji brought water. Yuki spoke softly about the progress I had made, and Hiroshi sat beside me, his hand over my heart, monitoring my heartbeat through the bond, helping me regulate my nervous system. "You're safe," Hiroshi said. "Your heartbeat is here. We can hear it. You're safe." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. I believed that I was safe. I believed that being found was not the worst thing that could happen. 3 months after bonding, the Okada brothers told me something that changed everything. We were in the study, all 5 of us, and Soren said that they had made a decision that affected all of us. "There's another Omega," Kenji said. "He's suppressed. He's been suppressed for longer than you were. He's in danger, and our instinct, through the bonds, is to find him the way we found you." My first reaction was jealousy. My second reaction was possessiveness. My third reaction was understanding that those reactions were coming through the bonds from all 4 alphas simultaneously, that they felt the possessiveness, that they were asking for permission even though my emotions were their emotions. "Can an Omega exist in the center of 5 people without feeling diminished?" Yuki asked carefully. "Can we expand what we have without losing what we've built? Can 4 alphas love 1 Omega?" Kenji added. "As much as 4 alphas can love 2 Omegas?" Can your heart hold enough space for another person to exist where you exist? Hiroshi's hand was on my heart. Through the bond, I could feel his heartbeat, his hope, his fear that I would say no. I could feel the way he wanted to search for this other Omega the way he had searched for me. I could feel the way he believed that there were others like us out there, others who were running, others who were suppressing, others who needed to be found. And I realized that this wasn't them asking permission. This was them trusting me with the future. This was them asking if I could expand what I had built, not out of selfishness, but out of compassion. They had heard my heartbeat through layers of chemical suppression. They had waited for me. They had loved me when I was trying to disappear. And now they were asking if I could do for someone else what they had done for me. I said yes. I said it before I could let the jealousy consume me. I said it before I could let possessiveness make me cruel. I said it because bonding with them had taught me something fundamental about the nature of love and connection. Love wasn't a finite resource. It was something that expanded to hold whatever you fed it. It was something that could survive multiple heartbeats, multiple bond marks, multiple points of connection. And if 4 alphas had waited 15 years for me, then somewhere out there was another Omega who was suffering the way I had suffered. Another Omega who was running the way I had run. Another Omega who believed that disappearing was the only way to survive. Another Omega who needed to learn that being found was actually the thing that could save them. That night, bonded to 4 alphas who had just begun the process of searching for someone else, I realized that the story wasn't ending. It was expanding. It was evolving into something bigger than any of us had anticipated. They buried my scent with chemicals. But heartbeats can't be buried. Heartbeats can't be suppressed. And 4 alphas who learned to listen for what couldn't be seen were patient enough to wait until I stopped trying to disappear and started trying to survive. Tomorrow, they would begin the search for another Omega. Tomorrow, our synchronized life would become more complicated. Tomorrow, the pattern would begin to shift again. But tonight, in the dark, with 4 alphas breathing around me, with 4 bond marks throbbing against my skin, with 5 heartbeats finding a common rhythm, I was simply present. I was simply alive. I was simply the person who had survived 7 years of trying to die and had learned, finally, that the thing worth living for was the sound of someone listening. My heartbeat, my survival, my refusal to disappear. That was the thing worth holding on to all along.